advantage of the opportunity. But right now is about right now.
The Plan B, Ohio State Buckeyes!
Give everything you got in your heart to this place.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rushing the Field, presented by Xfinity and BC Sports College Football Podcast. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. And Joshua, I don't think we expected that we would have this much news to discuss. We're a couple days removed from Selection Sunday. I think we thought we were going to be talking about the ACC and Notre Dame's complaints and all of that. And instead, breaking news from Ann Arbor.
I was in Vegas this past week, and all of college football was basically out there. And the things that we talked about were, playoff expansion and the Notre Dame aspect of things and exactly what you talked about. And then on the flight back, my phone almost exploded. So it's really crazy stuff that's gone on. And, can't wait to dive into some of the fallout here.
Yeah, so let's just go through the news. On Wednesday night, Michigan fired Sherrone Moore for cause after 2 seasons as the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines. Now, this came a couple of weeks, maybe a month or so after some rumors were really percolating online. It was kind of like the message board level of corners of college football Twitter. And everyone wondered immediately, what could it be if the head coach is fired for cause? Well, Michigan put out a statement very quickly after the news broke with a lot of details. The statement from the athletic director, Ward Manuel, said Michigan head football coach Sherrone Moore has been terminated with cause effective immediately. Following a university investigation, credible evidence was found that Coach Moore engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. This conduct constitutes a clear violation of university policy, and Michigan maintains zero tolerance for such behavior. So we got the details very quickly that there was something inappropriate happening with a staffer. I want to give just a couple more pieces of context and we get into what happened later in the evening. My pal Austin Meek over at The Athletic, I used to work very closely with him on Michigan news. He said a source briefed on the decision said the school received an anonymous tip regarding the inappropriate relationship, which prompted the investigation. The investigation did not initially produce evidence of the relationship, according to the source in The Athletic, but additional evidence came to light in the last 24 hours that led to Moore's dismissal. So we do not know, again, how much information there was and when and what changed that calculus for Michigan at this point. We're recording this Thursday, December 11th in the morning, and this has been a fast-moving story. So we apologize if some of these things are answered a little bit later by the time you listen to this. What happened later on Wednesday night was all of a sudden reports from police reporting. Sherrone Moore in custody at the Washtenaw County Jail on Wednesday night as a suspect in an alleged assault, hours after he was fired from the school. Again, my buddy Austin Meek in The Athletic, he said earlier on Wednesday, police were called to the listed address of a female Michigan football staffer at 4:10 p.m. According to the police dispatch, police sent officers to Sherrone Moore's address as well. He was detained in Saline, a few miles outside of Ann Arbor, as part of an alleged assault investigation. And then obviously he eventually went to the Washtenaw County Jail. So this is a really messy story, Joshua. It's bad. It's sad. There's a lot of layers to it. And I don't even know where to start. I would say that, one of the first things that you would think about if you are a head coach of a college football program, making a lot of money. If it were me, I would stay home. I would not interact with anyone in inappropriate ways. I would sit at home with my wife and kids, and not have bad judgment and put your career and family and life at risk like this. Like that's where my mind first goes, as we are continuing to wait more information of exactly what happened.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate from that perspective of it, and folks have talked about it, but you think about his wife and children in this scenario and the impact that it has on a family. You think about other people that are involved too and how their world is now upside down as well, regardless of their level of involvement and culpability in this. Like it's a lot of unfortunate fallout that happens there. But from the perspective of Sherrone Moore, I look at him as a guy who was lucky to be the head coach at the University of Michigan. Jim Harbaugh really wanted him to have that role and that responsibility when he left to go to the Los Angeles Chargers. And so from that perspective, it's almost like you have to operate probably above and beyond what most guys would do in terms of, morals and character and how you handle that job. Because if it was an open search, you wouldn't have been the guy. So that's what I immediately think about. And then we got to the end of this year. Michigan's 9-3. Sherrone Moore talked about how it fell short of their standard. And I think a lot of the reason why was because the good teams that they played, they just weren't competitive in those ball games. And folks like you and I started to ask the question, is next year the year for Sherrone Moore, right? Like, is that the one where people start to ask about his tenure and can you fire him at that point? Are you far enough away from this investigation where maybe they gave him some protection so he wouldn't, just get out of there quickly? And now you see this story, and certainly people affiliated with the University of Michigan don't like what went down, and nobody likes what went down here. But I think that there are some people like, man, we just unloaded a coach that we really didn't have a ton of faith in to be the guy for this program. And that's a really interesting piece of this where, like, I think that there are some people that just aren't sad to see him go because they were like, we need a better coach for this program.
Well, I wanted to ask you this. I mean, you have been, in college football, you have been in NFL programs and organizations. We both hear a lot of things that are happening in a lot of places around the country. It's not abnormal that coaches would be engaging in, I would guess, extramarital relationships, potentially even around small college towns. Is this the sort of thing that could have potentially just been swept under the rug, like covered up, instead of gone public, instead of the school putting out a statement kind of airing all the dirty laundry, if they had wanted to?
I would say it depends on all of the details there, but a typical, we have both heard, maybe even seen some of these types of relationships. And if you're winning ball games and you're recruiting really well, that people will find a way to make sure that these things don't become public or they don't blow up and harm the university and the coach and the person that was involved on the other side of things. And that's been kind of a talking point there too. Like you would have to imagine that if they're sitting there at maybe 11-1 or even 10-2 and they just beat Ohio State and they're looking at a college football playoff bid, who knows what happens here, right? And like that's the nefarious part of this. I think there's going to be a lot of speculation. We're already seeing some of the crazy speculation, but even on that portion of it, was this something that if he was a better football coach, like they would have figured out a way that this wasn't blowing up?
There's a lot of ways to be very cynical about this and the timeline, because we don't have more information at this point.
Really quick, the timeline I think is going to be litigated by a lot of people online who aren't equipped to do it early on. And I think it's important to understand that when it comes to a personnel matter, and in particular, something that involves an employee of high rank, somebody who works for them in a a relationship, sexual relationship, you have to be very careful about how that is investigated. You have to be very careful about the facts that you use. And especially when you're trying not to pay a guy, you have to make sure all of your ducks are in a row. And so I know that there are people who are immediately like, they waited until after he lost to Ohio State, or they waited until after they signed the class. And to your point, it's a very cynical way to look at it, because I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt, at least today, before we have all the information, that this is not a scenario where you get to jump the gun at all. You have to take your time in assessing the facts when it comes to one of these situations.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, especially when you're trying to fire someone for cause.
Right.
And avoid, I think it would be like a $12 million buyout or something like that for Sherrone if it were fired without cause. There's a lot of steps and a lot of processes that have to come into play. And that's why, again, I think we need more information from Michigan. They need to be more transparent about this and about that timeline for that reason. I would still also think that the high school signees, everyone who just signed with Michigan, and, the transfer, the people on the roster, everyone will have an opportunity to leave. Like that is where the NCAA has loosened their rules to make sure that people can get out of, national letters of intent, which are now, these aid documents, which don't kind of have the same name and acronym. But that you can do that for a head coaching change, so
Yeah,
that you are not bound and you are not stuck.
that
But
was one of the first things real quick that I thought about was, like those guys for me, I'd be like, all right, where am I going to go? Kerry Combs was also just hired like a
2
few
days
days
ago.
ago.
Yeah,
Yeah. Guy
and
who, go
Sherrone
ahead.
also met with the media to discuss,
Yes.
like, to do a season wrap up. That's where, like, I think the timeline stuff, they
Yes.
genuinely were moving forward like a normal off season.
Yes, that's kind of the thing there, and I know people are like, "Oh, maybe you suspend them with pay while you're doing it," but again, like you don't. Again, if it's not, if there wasn't evidence of the relationship before, I don't think you want that thing to blow up like there's any smoke anyway, in case it didn't happen. But like I think about those guys too, where it's like Kerry Combs just dropped into Ann Arbor, and he's like, "All right, like what am I gonna do now?" So there, I mean, a lot of people are affected in a situation like this, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
No, there are. And obviously there's going to be a coaching search now. So
Yeah.
I do want to talk about that before we get off this subject. Biff is going to be the interim head coach again for Michigan.
Welcome
He
back,
was,
Biff.
but Biff is just always around. So
Yep.
actually, worth pointing this out, by the way. Sherrone Moore was suspended for 2 games this season. Biff was the interim head coach. They won those 2 games.
Yes.
Sherrone actually was set to serve 1 more game suspension at the start of next season. So that's all tied to the Connor Stallions sign stealing scandal, separate from other things. Sherrone also had a 1 game suspension in the previous NCAA scandal and issues related to the COVID era recruiting violations. Hard to keep track of all of these scandals, which actually brings me to a point before we get to the coaching search.
Yes.
Should Ward
Let's
Manuel
talk
be
about
the
it.
one to make this hire? He has overseen, again, 2 NCAA scandals. You've had a number of staffers who have had to get let go for different reasons. You
Right.
had Matt Weiss, FBI, when they, raided his computers and all his electronics. You had a lot going on. There was also a hockey investigation and
Yes.
an abrupt firing there. There's just been a lot in the last couple of years. And Ward Manuel, the athletic director, has survived all of it. But at some point, like I think that the buck needs to stop at the top, and there needs to be some responsibility and potentially some changes at the top of the athletic department, because this is just unacceptable. I mean, we always talk about the idea of a Michigan man, which
Sure.
don't think people can use anymore after all of
Yeah.
these
They're taking their laps
scandals.
online.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It sets up for the punchlines. But that's where my mind goes about leadership. I don't think they have a full-time president right now,
This is a
because
tough
their
spot.
president
Feels like
left.
LSU right now.
Yeah, but they didn't immediately hire someone and plug people in to be able
I
to,
know.
make a decision. So there is a gap and a void in leadership there right now. And so I don't know that they'll make this change necessarily, but it needs to be asked. This is a lot of terrible, negative headlines, negative attention, really bad situations. And, again, leadership, you're trying to, in college sports, people always love to say that they're like setting examples for college
Yeah.
players and helping them
Yeah.
grow. And I think that, it goes all the way up in the administration. And I don't know what lessons, these that we're taking away from the leadership at Michigan right now.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because like I can almost look at the football stuff and be like, you know, Ward was bullied by Jim Harbaugh essentially, and that was
To
like
fight those
Harbaugh's
battles.
yeah,
Yeah.
rogue program and rogue staffers that he hired, and Sherrone was Harbaugh's guy that he wanted to install. And like all of this like points directly to Jim Harbaugh running a rogue program, not really vetting who he was hiring, whatever you want to say. And like to your point, a lot of crazy different things. Guys get DUIs in other cities, but they've had them there and had to get rid of people. The hacking thing, like I don't know how anybody can really vet that, but like it's a thing that genuinely happened and you have to consider it. But you mentioned hockey. We didn't talk about Juwan Howard and how that was an issue. Now you bring in Dusty May, and like certainly you feel a lot better about what's going on there. But there is this legitimate question about like, do you make the move? And to me, I feel like at least from a public consumption PR standpoint, it seems to me like this would be the time. Like I think now you just have to be like, thank you, but we should start clean. And especially since you're hiring a new football coach, you already got the basketball one figured out. Like right now would be the cleanest time if you were going to do something.
Well, and I think you could also bring it back to the point you made, like right off the top, that there was not a search.
Right.
Ward picked Sherrone Moore to take over this program, was he vetted? Like, how much information, was brought to people's attention? Like, you're responsible for one of the bluest of blue blood programs,
Yes.
and you're expected to do it a certain way. Anyway, so there's a lot there that we can continue to sift through. But again, you do have a leadership vacuum, so it may not happen. But it is worth posing the question. And again, I think they're going to need to act very quickly if they're going to have a national search here, which I think they can. We're recording this. It's December 11th. You have until January 2nd when the transfer portal window opens. So I think you can. Now, the problems here, Joshua, are we just had a ton of turnover at a number of Power 4 programs.
Right.
So a lot of coaches either just sign new contracts to go somewhere else, like a Matt Campbell, who would have been a logical candidate for this job. Or you have a lot of coaches that just signed extensions to stay where they are. Again, I still think you have some time and some flexibility. I think there are two obvious names: Kalen DeBoer at Alabama and Jedd Fisch at Washington. Now, Kalen DeBoer, let's just talk about this. So obviously he's got a good job at Alabama. I want to bring you back to the national championship game that Michigan won. Michigan beat Washington. There was so much narrative and conversation around that game as, hey, is Jim Harbaugh facing his successor?
Right.
Because we thought Jim was leaving, but that dragged out so long to go to the NFL that then Alabama suddenly opened because Nick Saban suddenly retired. And that's where Kalen DeBoer went. But he was like the hot name, and he would have been a really good fit at Michigan, right? So if that timing had worked out differently, I think he ended up at Michigan in that situation. So now, again, he has said recently in recent weeks, loves Tuscaloosa, really happy at Alabama. Like, that was mostly in response to, like, was he at all ever in the Penn State search? So that might not be a possibility. Jedd Fisch has coached at Michigan, he's coached at a lot of different places. I think you could definitely get Jedd Fisch. I think those
crawl over broken glass to get to
Ann Arbor. I agree. Yes, I agree with that. And I think both of those guys are offensive minded guys.
Yep.
So if you're Bryce Underwood, freshman quarterback, I think
gotta be a big part of that. Yes.
Gotta be a huge part of it. You have to retain him. Which, he signed a multi-year NIL deal. But
we know those contracts are as fake as a contract can be.
Right. And also, I'm sure there's language in there about like a head coaching change or something. But, yes, schools have been very hesitant to like fight the enforceability of some of these deals.
Which I love that Georgia's doing it, by the way. I know it's a different topic for a different day.
They broke the seal on that. So Joshua, my question to you is, first of all, can Michigan make some big swings here? Because do you think there's enough time to do it?
There's always time when you're Michigan, right? Like I think if this job would have been open during the rest of the cycle, it would have been right there with LSU, right? Like people would have been debating, is Michigan a better job than LSU, right? So from that standpoint, I think that there's always time. Now, we also know that coaches right now are maybe a little bit more in the world, and especially with all the contracts that people sign where they're like, if I can build a competitive team where I'm at, there's a path to the playoff, etc. So it becomes way more difficult. Kalen DeBoer, Jedd Fisch, two names that you named, I think are both obvious and at play. The one that I start to think more and more in the Kalen DeBoer mold is Steve Sarkisian. I would make a run at him.
I would too.
Offensive-minded guy. And is the Texas thing maybe starting to get a little bit weird? Like they were supposed to be one of the top teams, maybe missed on some guys. Like, you look at the path in the Big Ten versus the path in the SEC, you probably feel a little bit better about your ability to make it to the college football playoff year in and year out there. I just, from a standpoint of if you're going to swing, you got to swing big. Like, Sark is a guy who I'd look at. And frankly, if I'm Sark and I'm even thinking about it, like if it's not this, maybe you're waiting on Lincoln Riley one day to leave USC and that would be your exit plan. Like he might have some interest. I'm not saying this with any background information, but I think he'd take a look.
I think your point is super valid of you absolutely call all of these guys. Like you call them and make sure that everything's good. And you're calling Texas in a situation where it was, microscope. You're under the microscope all season long. Didn't make the playoff. Certainly not playing for a national championship. Everyone was critiquing every little thing. You got asked if you're
Everything.
going to give up play calling. There was just a lot going on. It's a great job, but it's a very hard job at
Mhm.
Texas. So yeah, I think the timing is everything in life. And I think that's why you make the call and you say, maybe now, if, certainly better than last year. And listen, there were remember we had that whole news cycle of, are Steve Sarkisian's reps trying to get him an NFL job?
Yes.
It took a few weeks for Steve Sarkisian to put a statement out that said, like, no,
Yes.
I'm coming back to Texas. I'm going to be coaching at Texas.
Which
So that
makes me
means
think
the
that
crack is open.
yes, like it got a little bit weird for him is what I thought this season. And any of these big coaches where things maybe the narrative started to get away from them a little bit, I'm calling.
Yeah, I agree. So those would be the ones, and we'll see. I don't think you have to go internal to try to like stabilize things.
You shouldn't, in my
With
opinion.
this window. Yeah, and again, it's
Yeah.
Michigan. You always have time for a search,
Yes.
a national search if you're Michigan, but you do need to act quick. That January 2nd deadline is the key one. But again, you probably could wait to see if Alabama loses their first round game to Oklahoma. You'd still have, and again, enough of a wiggle room. We'll continue to cover everything, the fallout of what's happening with Sherrone Moore in Ann Arbor, especially once we get more concrete information. These are the stories that are really hard to talk about because A, they're very fast moving. B, there's a lot of online speculation. And C, there's a lot of like really hard topics to discuss, especially when you're talking about an arrest and potential charges. So we will continue to cover it responsibly moving forward. I do want to flip gears and talk about all the arguing about football, which now feels great in comparison to real hard news. But we have spent the days since Selection Sunday very angry. Like everyone in college football has been very angry since Sunday. Uniquely angry. I think we have that more so than maybe other sports because like arguing and subjectivity and how you pick a national champion have kind of like always been baked into this sport. But no one has been angrier than Notre Dame. The athletic director, Pete Bevacqua, went on a multi-day media blitz explaining why Notre Dame was very upset by being left out, the way that they were left out, with Miami and Notre Dame flipping at the 11th hour, feeling like the rug got pulled out from under them. And we knew this happened immediately on Sunday. Well, not immediately, a couple hours later. But Joshua, I don't think you and I have talked on this platform about it.
No.
Because it happened, right? We were doing the live show. It happened later. Okay, so Notre Dame decides, no, we're not going to play in a bowl game at all. No Pop-Tarts, nothing. What was your reaction to the Irish 10-2, just missing the playoff, deciding not to play in the postseason at all?
Yeah, I mean, like, do I love the idea of a team passing on an opportunity to play more football? No. Do I completely understand them? Yes. And if I was Notre Dame, would I be like this? Probably so. I think, and I've talked about this, I think it starts with this idea is in the 12-team era, one of the things that got killed and I think really hurts is this idea that you don't get to end your season saying that you're Fiesta Bowl champs anymore, right? Like that is a part of the bracket. And if you don't get in, like playing for Pop-Tarts, as much as you and I love that bowl game, doesn't have the same prestige. And when you're Notre Dame, and you're trying to put trophies in the trophy case, like I don't think the Pop-Tart one really holds that much weight. And so I think that's a part of the calculus. The other part that I think is really important here, and the one that resonated with me the most, is it absolutely felt like there was a coordinated effort by whomever that Notre Dame was going to be the one that was boxed out. Whether it was the ACC doing what they did, or whether it was this whole Alabama can't even slide one spot narrative that started to pop up on the last day in the first 15 minutes of that selection show, and Nick Saban coming out in his crimson jacket, which somebody should have told him, please just don't wear that today, because obviously people are going to feel a way about it.
He's done it multiple years, if I'm remembering right.
And it's like, I'm not trying to, I've already made my piece about Saban. I'm not trying to take the shot at him, but just the whole setup looked like it was everything to make Notre Dame the odd team out in this scenario. Well, why the hell would I give you the opportunity to broadcast one of my games in the postseason and make money off of it? By the way, I started looking at the ACC and what they did in terms of their TV. Their highest rated game was when Notre Dame played Miami the first week of the season. and their best games all year long have been against teams that aren't in the ACC. So let's be perfectly clear about where they're at. If I'm Notre Dame, there's no chance that they get to touch my brand in the postseason. And so, yeah, it's a tantrum. Yes, it's take your ball and go home. Yes, it's petty. All the different things that people are saying. If I were them, I'd be just as petty too. So I totally understand where they're at.
I think that it would have been totally different. If you don't have weekly rankings, you know how I feel about those. They should have been abolished years ago.
Everybody's on that now.
Finally momentum to get rid of them.
You started it though. You got to make sure people know that you started
years, and certainly earlier this season because they were particularly bad this year. But let's say we don't have weekly rankings, so we haven't seen Notre Dame ahead of Miami for 5 weeks, and then we get to the final weekend, and there's a bunch of 10-2 teams, and we're not sure what order they are. So Miami and Notre Dame go into Selection Sunday not knowing, not really having any good sense of like what the order of these teams is going to be. And then we see Miami ahead of Notre Dame. I think we're all like, okay, yep, that makes sense. They played.
It hurts, but it is what it is.
So to me, it's the expectation for 5 weeks that you are in a good spot. You've done everything you can because you're winning games and you're getting that cushion ahead of a team you beat or you lost to. Again, you're a little concerned because Alabama just leapfrogged you off of a win over Auburn. But outside of that, like the committee is telling you you're in a good spot. And then at the 11th hour, they pull out the rug from under you. So that's where I think I understand then suddenly not wanting to play. Like you have been geared up towards the college football playoff, preparation, schedule, all the things you need to do for 5 weeks because the committee has been signaling to you that you're good. You're fine. So then to change it up and to do it at the end and then tell you, nope, you're not in it. I understand that. I don't think they would have done this. And Pete Bevacqua, the athletic director, had said like, this is a 1-year thing. It's not like they're out of the business of non-CFP bowls. 100%. This was, you were expecting this one thing this whole time. And we're told from the committee, you're good. You're in it until you're not. I do want to get, go ahead.
Touch on that because I think it points to this thing, and I'll say this is a lot of football people are liars. They lie 100%. And the reason I'm saying that is everybody who's a football person loves talking about processes and process oriented and got to make sure the process is right regardless of the outcome. And it feels like a lot of football people right now are just like, well, they got the outcome right. Like Miami should be over Notre Dame because they won head to head. I will never argue anybody on that in terms of what the outcome is and how they got to, but the process was really bad to get there.
Yes.
And I think that is the point that would make me really mad as a Notre Dame person or anybody really who's a fan of this sport. How am I supposed to trust this process? How am I supposed to have faith in it when that happens? And then the last thing I'll say about denying a bowl bid is everybody's doing this whole, well, wouldn't you love to get the practices and develop your team, yada, yada, yada. This ain't the old days anymore. Like these people are worried about doing NIL contracts right now. They're worried about retaining their roster right now. And why the hell would you develop guys who are getting ready to get out the door and then give them a platform to get some good tape because your top players aren't playing? So guys who you haven't seen all year, who are even thinking about leaving, are going to be the ones taking the bulk of the snaps. Like that to me is another reason why like I'm just not going to participate this year, and we'll regroup and we'll figure it out for next year. This idea of having bowl practices to develop your team is an outdated thought process because it's not going to be the same team for next year anyway.
Well, and to that point, Kansas State and Iowa State are not playing bowl games. They opted out. They're going to owe the Big 12. I think it's like $500,000 each.
$500,000 a piece.
Yeah, for their fine to not fill their bowl obligations. Those are teams that have coaching changes and transitions and disappointment. Certainly for K-State, they're not doing it either, despite all of those other reasons. Oh, the young guys, you could get them reps, you could see, you could evaluate them. No, it's not worth it if it's not worth it.
Yep.
And there were a number of 5 and 7 teams too that were like, nope, our season was over. We already started our normal off-season stuff. We're not doing it. So I'm with you on that. I think it's defensible. I've not gotten really worked up either way on the Notre Dame Bowl opt-out. But again, my main point is I don't think that happens if they don't see those rankings for 5 weeks.
Right.
And
it's a process
feel
problem.
like it's a process problem. There are a lot of other elements of this anger for Notre Dame. So they're mad at the selection committee. They're mad at the weekly rankings. And I think ESPN, right? Because to your point about like not wanting to be in an ESPN bowl, they're also mad at the ACC. Now, Notre Dame is a partial member for football. They are a full-time member for their Olympic sports in the ACC. Let's listen to the Notre Dame athletic director, Pete Bevacqua. He called a press conference earlier this week, and he didn't really pull any punches.
I understand why you would go on a social media campaign to attack an important partner. Well, who's some of our important partners in the football space? NBC. We wouldn't do that to NBC. Now, I understand they have to stand up for their teams in football. We just think there's other ways to do it. And it has created damage. I mean, I'm not going to shy away from that. And that's just not me speaking. People a lot more important at this university than me feel the same way. So I think it has done some real damage, and I think the ACC knows that.
Okay, so one of the things that Pete Bevacqua is talking about here is, well, the main thing, the social media campaign from the ACC. So we pulled a couple of tweets if you're watching this on YouTube. It started with that like Team A versus Team B, like head-to-head comparison. So I'm looking on the date on this. This is November 10th. Okay, so Notre Dame is Team A, right? Yes. No, Team B.
Team B.
Team B. Miami is Team A. So they're not calling Notre Dame out by name. So they do this for a little bit. Then there's another tweet. Full week later, November 17th. This one are screenshots of people saying that Miami should be in over Notre Dame. So like very specific. And there it just says, don't just take it from us. So Pete says during this long press conference and part of his little media tour that that they were attacking Notre Dame in these posts. And that after the first one, he thought it was just kind of like a rogue social media person from the ACC. And he expected a call and an apology from the commissioner, Jim Phillips. And then it continued. And then there's also been reports about internal messaging, like emails that they were accidentally copied on about how they were doing this and some of the messaging around it. Now, I'm not surprised that the ACC would be fighting for its full-time football members. They're the ones that make money for the ACC. So if they make the playoff and then advance and win games, then the ACC keeps that money. If Notre Dame makes the playoff and keeps winning, Notre Dame pockets that money. Like we already know that. But it got weird. We talked about this, right? In real time, that it was strange how aggressive the ACC was at taking shots against Notre Dame when they could have gone after BYU or Utah or even Alabama, right? Like that was strange in the moment.
Yeah. That's the one that I'm thinking of. Like, I got to this point kind of toward the end that I thought that Notre Dame and Miami were both playoff worthy teams. And then the further we got into it, I'm like, BYU, not so sure about. And then Alabama's the one that you mentioned. I think it's egregious that they're in. And like, that's where you as the ACC and one of your partners in Notre Dame, maybe you guys come together and you wage a campaign and say that we're both playoff teams. We saw that game early in the year. Like both of us had reasons why we should be in, yada, yada, yada. By the way, not to take this segment a completely different place, I don't think there's been a team in the history of the 4-team or this new playoff era that we're in that's been blown out twice in a season that's gotten in, right? And like that would have been overnight. I would have just been hammering that home. 2 blowouts, you can't play in the playoffs, but neither here nor there. Like it felt like a very interesting move to make with a partner that you certainly value. We know that relationship is important to both sides of this thing, and to kind of do things that would make the relationship weird is a question to me.
So after Pete has gone on this media tour, get a statement from the ACC. I'll read it to you. This is from ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips. The University of Notre Dame is an incredibly valued member of the ACC, and there's tremendous respect and appreciation for the entire institution. With that said, when it comes to football, we have a responsibility to support and advocate for all 17 of our football playing member institutions, and I stand behind our conference efforts to do just that leading up to the College Football Playoff Committee selections on Sunday. At no time was it suggested by the ACC that Notre Dame was not a worthy candidate for inclusion in the field. We are thrilled for the University of Miami while also understanding and appreciating the significant disappointment of the Notre Dame players, coaches, and program. I would maybe take a little bit of issue that they were saying that they weren't a worthy candidate when you're doing the head-to-head resume things.
Right.
But
that's semantics, I feel like, from them. Right.
I agree. There's also a separate issue that also would have avoided this, is that if the ACC had put Miami in their championship game. Like
Yeah,
if their head-to-head tiebreakers were like committee rankings or something, and they put them in and they got in as the ACC representative, then you know what? Notre Dame makes it in as the final at large.
yeah, there's just so much to talk about there. Like the size of the conferences and the tiebreakers are going to continue to be an issue. This goes back to Alabama, by the way, and the committee being in a spot with them. They were the 5th best SEC team by their own rankings, but the number 1 seed in the SEC championship game. Like,
Right.
what the hell are you supposed to actually do with that? So, like, there are legitimate issues here. But this idea that the ACC just like they couldn't find a way to get their best team playing for the conference championship is wild. And then the idea of how the auto bids are divvied up, because none of us ever anticipated that we were going to be in a scenario where one of the Power 4 conferences wouldn't be in a position to get their conference champion in. Like,
Yes.
this was the year where all of the potential problems kind of came to a head.
Right. And then it's sort of like, well, of course we have to advocate for Miami. Well, you also could have changed the system a little bit or
Yeah.
put them in. I mean, again, I understand that like it's not
I do
realistic to like
too.
override
But
your
it is.
rules.
The Big Ten did it during COVID, right?
I
Like
know.
there was
They
precedent.
could have been like,
They
this is what's best
literally
for the
could have been
ACC.
like, yeah, and we saw this
We're
happen
putting
too.
Miami
Don't blame
in.
us. The Big Ten opened the
know.
floodgates to be able to change things on the fly, which is, to me, it's again not a great process, but it's probably the best process to get to
That
an
could have
outcome.
happened.
Yes, where you want to be in a position as a conference that your best team is in a position to make it, because
And
that's
for
your
sure
best
in.
way
For
to
sure
advance
in.
and make money. Yes. It's
Well,
the
and
whole
then
thing is
it
crazy.
creates the whole conversation that we have been having since Sunday about, do you think they did it because the ACC would have been left out? Could Notre Dame
That
have
had to
gotten
have been a
in
part of it.
if Virginia had won the ACC? I mean, all of that
And-
stuff
and-
ends up playing into this because
It's-
because the process is bad
Yes.
and these are humans and you're
Yes.
just wondering.
It's again, and it's that part of it where, like, are we going to leave a Power 4 conference out? And I
Right. And how
genuinely
is that
think they
not in the
didn't want
back
to
of
do
your
that.
mind?
It
Like
is
as a
in the back
committee
of their
member.
mind. Like
Yeah.
I'm convinced. And then the other thing too is, well, how do we handle the SEC championship game? Because if Alabama falls out of this thing because they lost, like that would be the end of conference
And
title games as we
they
know
didn't
it.
want to do that. They didn't want
Right.
to like create the decision that would end championship games.
That's what I'm getting at. Like, this
But
was
yeah, it was
not
obviously in their
necessarily
mind.
about like
Yeah.
the committee criteria, whatever. Like, this was about the structure of the sport, how people consume it, like what happens in the back rooms when they go to have these meetings days after the selection comes out. Like, imagine the people in Vegas this week if the ACC was completely out and then something happened with Alabama. Like, the world would have been over.
Before we, kind of fully switch gears, because I want to talk about like where Notre Dame and the ACC go from here, but we have to
man.
listen to this clip from Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner at the Sports Business Journal Intercollegiate Athletics Forum. That's all I need to know. Here we go. Take it away, Brett.
Say this, and I'm a little outspoken about it. I don't like how Notre Dame's reacted to it.
So
Okay,
Pete Bevacqua said,
I think Pete's his behavior has been egregious. It's been egregious going after Jim Phillips when they saved Notre Dame during COVID. We all knew, and it was very transparent. Hunter was very transparent about it, the chair, that as Notre Dame and Miami got closer together, head-to-head would be a factor. Okay, BYU lost. They became closer together, head-to-head made a difference in that decision. So I think he is totally out of bounds in his approach, and if he was in the room, I'd tell him the same thing.
Okay, so that's kind of wild to hear from a commissioner of a different conference, not involved. This is also, I think, kind of representative of the rest of college sports that knows that Notre Dame gets special treatment and has special rules, right? Like Notre Dame has a seat at the table for the CFP,
Right.
which nobody else has. Everyone else is represented by their conference commissioner. So you have, Tony Petitti representing 18 schools. You have one person representing one school in this meeting. And so they know all those other rules. We've also heard from Pete this week talking about how, there's provisions that protect Notre Dame, that if they're in the top 12, they automatically get in, which I will defend from a Notre Dame perspective. If you don't have something like that in the rules, then you're just worried that the conferences will collude and keep you out every single year whenever you
Again,
have a good team.
Yeah,
So I
this kinda
understand.
feels like this was the first step in doing that.
Correct. So I think that some of the reaction from Yormark is like the frustration where like Notre Dame won $20 million last year. because they got to keep all of the money that they made in the playoff. They have a great path to the playoff every single year. 11-1 with a bad loss, not a problem. Even hosted a game. 10-2, it was dicey, of course. But that was such a strange comment from a Big 12 commissioner that we have to talk about this. Because even if he is channeling frustration of other people, he's not in the ACC. He's not directly involved in this like all-out war that Pete Bevacqua is waging. And it feels really personal.
I guess there are two things for me, and I'll start here, is people do this whole, oh, Notre Dame, they, the rules are different for them. And I would ask the question, do you care about that from a moral and value standpoint, or do you care about that because it's not you? Because my answer to that is, I think if most people were Notre Dame, they would be perfectly fine with how Notre Dame gets to operate in this world. And they're just mad that they're not. Right. And so like, I think you have to, when you start like talking about Notre Dame's existence in college football, the point where you have to start is if you're going to get on a soapbox, I think you have to ask yourself, is that because of what your values say, or is it just because you're not Notre Dame? And I think it's the latter for a lot of people. That's number one. Number two, one of the reasons why this was weird is not because it's just like, oh, here's a guy who wasn't even involved in the drama, etc. They dropped BYU for no good reason when they didn't drop Alabama. And you could have had an opportunity to talk about that in the inconsistency in the committee's process, because you said they were very transparent. I don't agree with that whatsoever. They were transparent about how they would compare the head-to-head. They weren't transparent about how they would get there and how some conferences have to deal with dropping in the rankings when other teams can go out there and get their ass whooped in a conference championship game for their second blowout and third loss of the year and not move whatsoever. In that hurt your conference. That hurt your conference. And you are over here defending everything but that right now. I have an issue with that as somebody whose fiduciary duty it is to represent the conference to the best of their ability.
If I'm BYU, I'm annoyed that we're doing this instead of defending BYU's honor. No, I'm with you, because that's where I would focus too. Because, and you heard me talk, text, tweet, write about this in Sunday. I think what happened with Alabama and BYU is equally as egregious as what happened with Notre Dame, Miami, because Notre Dame, Miami could have just been fixed by literally flipping them at any other point or not having weekly rankings, right? And then no one would have been expecting Notre Dame to be above them. What happened with Alabama and BYU is wildly inconsistent within the same set of rankings. One team that got blown out dropped. The other one did not even move. And the argument given for Alabama not moving is because they beat Georgia. So they split those games. I have been arguing this. They already got credit for that. They were number 9 going into the weekend because they beat Georgia, because they had one of the best wins in the country. So the committee like double counts it and then penalizes BYU for 2 losses to the same team.
Right.
Instead of being like, if you like BYU, here's what you say. You say, well, they just really don't match up well against this one team, but we think they're really good and we think the body of work elsewhere. Like, we're kind of going to treat it as 1 loss, not 2. Instead, it's like more than a second loss because it causes them to drop. And Alabama becomes the only team in recent years that has lost a conference championship game while being ranked and not dropping at all. So yes, that's what Brett Yormark should have been doing.
When they lost is the craziest bar in the world. They got twice the credit for 1 win after losing.
Yes. And losing badly. Like, it wasn't even a close loss. It was close win, blowout loss. But why is Brett Yormark not making that case? That's what he should be arguing about. That
frustrated me when I saw that clip. I was like, that to me is incredible. Like, I was like, oh my God. Like, you got into somebody else's drama and like just completely pushed one of your schools to the side to chastise somebody else publicly. Like, my God.
Well, what I was going to say too is like, sometimes these commissioners would rather have these conversations like when the commissioners get together. They all meet the morning of the the weekend of the national championship game. And they kind of like reflect back, how did we feel about stuff? Then they do like a full debrief in April. So I understand that some people would be like, I'll save my specific complaints about my school, my leagues, whatever, until then. But if you're wading into the Notre Dame ACC drama, you're just a little messy. Like, this is Joshua, this is right up your alley. This is reality TV. This is like the Real Housewives of college football. And
yeah, it is.
But what it does is it speaks to me on the level of, okay, so Notre Dame's mad. They're saying that the relationship with the ACC is damaged. And
Mhm.
Pete got asked later, like, can it heal? And he said, healing is possible for everything.
Right.
And I do think at the end of the day, you know, everyone vents, dust settles. You have Notre Dame realize, hey, we need this partial deal because we need teams that will play us in November.
Right.
And we're not going to be able to do that as an independent because everyone's in conference season. And then the ACC going, hey, yeah, all of our top watched games and all of our sellout crowds are against Notre Dame. So we need them and we need the star power and the prestige. And so maybe everything is fine. But people were already wondering, hey, could the Big Ten add them? What about the SEC?
Right.
What about the Big 12? And then you have the Big 12 commissioner being like, no, they're being egregious. Like they're not
Egregious
handling this
is
well. And I'm jumping in on
crazy.
this mess.
Yeah. No, it feels like if they did ever get forced into a place where they had to find a home, it certainly wouldn't be the Big 12.
That's one of the takeaways that I had from
Yeah.
that conversation. By the way, I'm apologizing, but anyone can hear the background noise. They're doing construction in my apartment building, and they love to do it when we record the podcast. It'll be quiet the whole rest of the day, every time. But no, I mean,
man.
I still think so. So here's where I am on that stuff moving forward. Again, I think that like cooler heads will prevail, and everyone will realize they need each other. The ACC is also like the perfect home for Notre Dame's Olympic sports, so that matters. I don't think the Big Ten would add Notre Dame unless they're a full-time football member.
Yes.
I don't know that the SEC would do either unless they were a full-time member. And I'm also like the SEC has a lot of big brands, big draws. I don't know that they feel like they need them in the same way. Like they've kind of been the white whale for the Big Ten.
You're right.
And then again, the Big 12, I think that would be a league that you would think maybe would do the partial deal, like would work with them because it would be such a valuable ad, but not after the commissioner said that.
It's crazy.
So yeah, I think we end up with the status quo, but maybe this signals that Notre Dame is thinking about its long-term future, like later rounds of realignment.
The comment you made about the Real Housewives of college football, it's because that, and I'm one of them. There's a lot of emotional men in college football. People love to make comments about emotions. The men are the emotional ones, and we have to acknowledge that. And that's why this is great reality TV.
Yeah. So far, I think we should actually vote people into the Real Housewives of college football. Lane Kiffin, charter member, OG.
100%.
Brett Yormark can be in there.
Well, we got to put him in now. Yes. Pete got to go in there too.
Pete. Yep. Okay. So we have 3 right now, and we'll wait to potentially add more. Okay.
Lane is like the queen bee of the housewives group, though.
Yes, true. Yeah. Once other coaches become more dramatic and we add them, Lane is still going to be like kind of the ringleader, I think.
No doubt.
Okay. So we're going to do game previews for the week 1 games, the first round games next week. So you're not missing anything there. There's just so much news and so much follow-up from the rankings that we needed to discuss. I do want to mention a quick note because we're not talking Heisman on this episode. And you want to know why, Joshua? Because I can't. I'm not allowed to. I'm not allowed to tell you. Well, we can talk about it, but I'm not allowed to tell you who I voted for.
Sure.
And this is so antiquated and silly. I think it takes away the buzz from the entire week when all of these people who cover the sport can't say who they voted for. So they took this away, or they made this rule that we can't say who we voted for until the award has been given out, because people would write columns saying, here's what I voted for, or tweeted or whatever. And people would like compile a list.
Yes.
And like kind of do a straw count and like figure out who won the Heisman. Most years it's lopsided or obvious. I don't think that takes away from anything. We still watch. We watch the speech. We want to see that moment. It's an incredible moment. And now you just have nothing because I can't write a column this week leading into the award of here's why I voted for so-and-so and celebrating their season. I can't say it on the radio. I can't say it on podcasts. I can't say it on television. And what it does is it just mutes the entire conversation. I just think it's been such a miss. It feels like it's such an afterthought, where Heisman Week used to be, a pretty big deal. Like there was a lot of buzz going into it. And now there really isn't until it's literally handed to the winner, which
the only
I just
thing
think
that
it's
you
such
get
a miss.
Is the people taking the screenshot of the submission that says, thank you for turning in your ballot or whatever, which really stinks. I'll say this about the Heisman, and it feels like Fernando Mendoza is going to win it, and I want to just give a pre-congratulations on that. Hell of a season for Indiana the whole way around. this feels like a year where these guys probably wouldn't be in New York in different years. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And I don't know if this is a trend that is going to start to happen, because last year was a non-traditional year. Like, is this a, like, whatever it is, but it certainly feels like an odd year where I think up until very late, we were kind of like, well, this guy's still in it. This guy's still in it. And then it kind of zeroed in on, well, it's the Big Ten championship. And if you don't like these guys, then you're probably voting for Diego, right? Like, that's what it kind of felt like toward
So
the end.
do you think it's because, so the 2 years of the 12-team playoff, last year's top two vote getters were Colorado and Boise State.
Yes.
This year it could be Indiana and Vanderbilt.
Right.
So do you think that's because we're watching more teams because more teams are alive in the playoff? Or do you think that you're just saying these have been weird years where we could go back to kind of like the blue blood quarterbacks or running backs or whatever it is next year?
I think it's a combination. I think that people genuinely are watching more things, right? Like you had to watch Colorado. That was something you had to watch. You had to watch Boise because they were going to be in it, right? And then to your point, Indiana, number 2 team in the country all year. Now they're number 1. Like, you're watching them, and then Vanderbilt is something that you watch. So I think that absolutely factors into it. I also look at the quarterbacks. It became a quarterback award. Like, when I left college, kind of started that era where it just was like, it felt like a string of quarterbacks. And you're not seeing guys with playing in games that you're like, these teams are really in it. You're not seeing the 4,000 yards passing and 50 touchdowns, right? Like, I watched Dwayne Haskins go out and throw for 50 TDs and not win a Heisman. We're just not seeing that right now. And I think that's been a big part of how you get to a point where it's like, okay, the default players I would typically pick, there's not one that's standing out right now. And now it just feels open.
Well, and I think too, like when you looked at the preseason Heisman odds, it was like all of those SEC quarterbacks.
It was, and none of them
were all
good.
disappointing. And Cade Klubnik was on there. Like, they did not live up to that. So I think if any of them had good seasons, they could have run away with it because like they had that name recognition and stuff coming into the season. Even like Lenora Sellers, if South Carolina went 9-3, he had that buzz coming into the year. So it has been a weird one. And again, then there's no buzz this week because people who cover the sport, most of us have votes and can't talk about it. So
are you saying that we got to get the Heisman reconfigured for the new era?
I would, and I also would have a minimum of 5 finalists invited to New York. There's no reason to me that we can't celebrate an extra person. Why? And then you get to be a Heisman Trophy finalist for the rest of your life. But
I
also,
know, it's a big deal.
The New York experience is actually really cool. Those players always talk about it, being around each other on that little award circuit, being at the ceremony, even if you're not going to win it. Like, you get to meet all these legends of college football. Why aren't we celebrating? Bring 10 guys. Why aren't we celebrating more people and their seasons that they've had in college football?
So I'm here for the being around some of the legends thing. Like, I was out in Vegas for to celebrate Urban going into the Hall of Fame, National Football Foundation, and I bumped into so many people out there, and people I hadn't seen in over a decade. There were people that I see pretty regularly, but for these guys kind of to be exposed to that, I think is a huge thing. Like, there's nothing like connection in this sport. I think it's one of the things that makes this sport different than anything else. And so you can convince me based off of the idea of connection.
I completely stand by that. And just that there shouldn't be a reason not to celebrate more players. So I guess we did end up talking about the Heisman after all, but not who I voted for. We'll find that out on Saturday night. Big surprise, big celebration. Okay. Like I said, next week we will dive further into these first round games. Joshua and I will have coverage before and after every round of the CFP the rest of the way through. And we'll continue to cover all the news. Michigan's now in a coaching search, and there's still so much more to come. This has been Rushing the Field presented by Xfinity. He's Joshua. I'm Nicole. Thanks for listening, and we will see you soon.